Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Jen's Books. I hope you're having a fantastic Friday. And I'm sorry for posting this late. It's been one of those weeks. You all know what I mean. Sometimes it happens and things just go out the window. And originally this video was going to be a April roundup. But I got stuck on a particular book. I've been in a bit of a slump since my last video. And I've read it. I've forced my way through the book that I would have DNF'd instantly, I think, just so you don't have to read it. So I can tell you all about that in my next April roundup video, which will be on Tuesday. But as I say, the things I do for you guys, reading that book for you, just so you don't have to. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the prize, Women's Prize. The shortlist has just been announced, and the International Booker Short Prize has just been announced. So there's a lot of conversation about prizes at the moment. It's difficult for me to tell you very much about my thoughts on the Women's Prize because I've not read all of the books in the list. A lot of the books I really enjoyed, like Wandering Souls and The Children of Paradise, didn't make it through. So I've got access to all of the books that are on the list, and I'm going to be working my way through those, and I'll tell you about them as and when I get through them. But was I surprised that Barbara Kingsolver was on there? No. Was I surprised that Maggie O'Farrell was on there? No. I've read the Maggie O'Farrell book. I enjoyed Hamnet more, but it is a really beautifully, richly evocative text. And Demon Copperhead I've been listening to, and it feels like a bit of endeavour. I don't even feel like I've made a dent in it yet, but it's just fantastic. You know, there's no querying the quality of the writing that's in that particular book. If I had to put money at this stage on the ones I have read, it would be Demon Copperhead that I would think would be the one that's up for the prize, the main contender. But we'll see. There's no guessing on this one at this point. So in the spirit of competitions and prizes, this 6 from a shelf is 6 books plucked from my shelf that have one thing in common, and they're all past Booker Prize winners. So I've done a bit of a deep dive. We're going all the way back to 1981 for the first one, and the most recent Booker Prize winner I'm going to discuss is from 2017. But all of these books are sort of stayed with me for different reasons. Sometimes it's about when I read them as well, and where I read them and what was going on in my life. I don't know if you ever find that you can read a book twice, and one time you'll love it and one time you won't, and it's to do with where you are in your life. But I think these are all books that stand up, and they're all recommendations from me. Some of them aren't easygoing, as you would guess from the Booker Prize, but all worth persevering. So the first one is the 1981 novel Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. This is a book I read some time ago. It is a hefty book. It's not only chunky, but it's multi-layered narrative. It's really rich. And it's not a light, quick read. It's not a summer holiday read, certainly. But if you persevere with it, it's certainly worth reading. It's a really enjoyable, interesting and unusual book. So it's about the end to colonial rule in India and the rise of partition and India's independence. And our main character is Salim, and he's born on the stroke of midnight, hence the name. And that means he's as old as independent India on the 15th of August 47. And as the book continues, we discover that Salim has kind of a magic power. He's actually able to engage with other children across the whole of the world. He's telepathic, but not just any children. These are other children that were born between 12 and 1 on the same night. All the children born at that time have varying different superpowers, and he's kind of the conduit to them, the one that brings them all together in his mind. So not only is this book a post-colonial novel or exploration, it's also got magic realism in it as well. But it's a really dense book. It's really lyrical. It's not always easy to read. It's kind of a stream of consciousness book, but it's incredibly rewarding and enjoyable and worth the effort. So that's my first choice. If you've never read Salman Rushdie before, for me this is the one to start with. It's his standout hit for me. So that's Midnight's Children. The next book is moving forward in time to 1989. A rhyme there, didn't even mean to. And that's The Remains of the Day by the fabulous Kazuo Ishiguru. And I can't really read this book without thinking of Emma Thompson and Anthony Hopkins in the adaptation from 1993, which is a fabulous one. I watched the adaptation before I read the book, so I think it's meant that when I did read the book, the characters are incredibly clear in my mind. So the central character of this book is an ex-butler called Stevens, and he's looking back on his life, and in particular his time working as a butler in the 1920s and 30s in a stately home for Lord Darlington. And while he's there, he meets Miss Kenton, who's a sort of colleague, and it's kind of a love story there, a love story that never comes to fruition. But the main thing about Stevens is his loyalty to Darlington, his loyalty to his role as a butler. He's separated himself up so much from the world that even when his father dies, he leaves him on his deathbed. His father was the butler before him, and goes down to serve dinner. He's that kind of a loyal servant to Lord Darlington, and it's this sort of loyalty that prevents him from ever opening up about his feelings to his beloved Miss Kenton, and nothing ever sort of comes of it. And he's also so loyal that when we discover that Lord Darlington has sympathy with the Nazis, he's still sort of loyal to him. So it's a really interesting exploration. It's really vivid. We really see into the lives of these servants in this house, but it's also kind of a sliding doors moment of what could have been. Again, if you've not read in Ishiguru, Remains of the Day is my one recommendation. Well, the first recommendation. Never Let Me Go is also fabulous, and there's lots of other books to enjoy from his back catalogue. But this would be the starting point for me if you've never read any of his work before, and certainly worthy of a Booker Prize. The next book I'm going forward to is in 1997, and this is probably the first Booker Prize book that I ever read. It came out when I was a student, and we were going through the period of time where we were sort of told to read all these prize winners to learn about what makes them good and help develop us as writers. So this is The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, and it's a family drama based in Kerala in India. It's about two twins called Rahel and Estefan, and they're brought up in a Sudanese Christian family home in Kerala, India, and it's all about the caste laws, it's all about the love laws, and it's over two time periods. It bounces between 1969 and 1993, and the twins at some point get separated. In 1993 is when they come back together. So the thing that really stuck with me about this book is there's this really beautiful sensory description of the family's chutney factory at the beginning, and that really stayed with me. I don't know why, that image, it was so delicious and sensuous that's something that's really stayed with me. But again, there's loads of twists and turns in here as well. There's plenty to keep you reading, and there's some interesting sort of stories and insights into the caste system. We have two characters who have a relationship. One of them is of a higher caste than the other, and the lower caste character becomes banished, and then he gets framed for a murder and gets beaten. So it's not all happy joy, but there's lots to enjoy there, and just a really beautiful, evocative and enjoyable read. So again, not the lightest read, but certainly worth the Booker Prize title. Next, we're moving to the first, believe it or not, Margaret Atwood book I ever read, and this is 2000, The Blind Assassin. This isn't my favourite Margaret Atwood book, but it is the one that started me reading her work, and I've read practically everything she's written ever since. I also love Margaret Atwood's poetry. If you don't like poetry, read Margaret Atwood's poetry. It's just absolutely fabulous. I always say to my students, if they say I don't like poetry, it's because you've not found the right poet, and Margaret Atwood is certainly one, and it's worth picking up. But talking about chunky books, look at this bad boy. It's a little bit intimidating, but it's a really interesting and experimental novel that has some really interesting characters and twists and turns throughout it. So the protagonist is called Iris Chase, and her and her sister have brought up, they're well off, but they've been brought up without their mother. Their mother died quite early on. And what's really interesting about this book is it's multi-leveled. The Blind Assassin is actually a novel inside the book. Iris is looking back on her life, but The Blind Assassin is a book that we're told Laura wrote. And then inside that is a sci-fi story. So it's a book with a story within a book within a book, which is why it's so thick. You're getting good value for money on it. And there's loads of twists and turns and love affairs and untimely deaths. And there's a real mix of genres as well. The book, The Blind Assassin, feels completely different. It feels like it's written by a different author than the actual book itself. Oh, this is confusing me, but I hope it makes sense to you. But it's a sort of juicy one, and if you like Margaret Atwood but you've not read this one, definitely pick it up. If you like Alias Grace, that came out not long before, not long after this one, or not long before, it's one or the other, you'll enjoy this. But Margaret Atwood's novels are always a joy anyway. Her accessibility and her wry humour and her perspective on life always makes them a book, in my opinion, that's worth picking up. Next, we're moving forward again, and we're moving to 2002 to The Life of Pi by Yann Martel. And a bit of a funny story about this. I bought this book and it sat on my shelf for a lot of years, a long time, maybe even 10 years. I bought the book because it was the Booker Prize winner, but the title threw me off because I thought it was about maths, because I'm an idiot and didn't bother reading the synopsis. So I didn't read it for ages. So it was such just a fabulous surprise when I did read it. And I went to go see the stage show of this actually last year as well, which was also amazing. But this is a really interesting book, and certainly not about maths, although our character does have an interest in metaphysics and maths and spirituality from the start. He can't decide which religion he wants to be, so he joins about 5 of them at the beginning of the book. But basically he's living in a family in Pondicherry, and the family own a zoo, and they decide to move to Canada, and so they take the animals with them. But unfortunately on their way there's a tragedy. I don't think it's giving anything away really, but the boat sinks, and Pi finds himself stuck on a little life raft with a hyena, a zebra, a Bengal tiger called Richard Parker, and an orangutan called Orange Juice. And he spends 227 days at sea surviving with this unlikely crew on the ship. And this is a book all about stories, and not only is the book telling us a story, but it's about the stories we tell ourselves as well, and what is reality, and when fantasy is easier to accept than reality. But this is a really vivid book, really easy to read. I just really loved it. And I think I mentioned before, I love books where characters are in a limited setting, because the writer has to be really experimental and innovative to make the most and keep the reader reading. But this is just a fabulous book. It's probably one of my favourite books, actually, I would say. Certainly in the top 20, and a definite recommendation if you've not read it. And if you've seen the film or you've seen the stage show and you've not read the book, still read the book. It's just fantastic. And the end, it rips your heart out. It's fabulous. A great book. And the last one I wanted to mention is the 2017 winner, which is George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo. This is another book that I didn't want to read. I don't know anything really about American history. I just, it just wasn't one, and it sounded so complicated and innovative. George Saunders is really known for his short stories. If you've not read his short stories, they're definitely worth reading. They're fabulous. And this is his first novel, but it just wasn't one that I wanted to read. It's not one that I wanted to pick up. And even when I first started reading it, I wasn't sure. You have to persevere with this book. You have to read a way into it before it all sorts of fall into place. But oh my God, it's worthwhile. It's just absolutely fabulous. So basically the story is about the death of Abraham Lincoln's son, Willie. And he dies from a fever, and he's put into a crypt. But Willie becomes stuck because of his father's grief. He gets stuck in the Bardo, which is like a Tibetan term for purgatory. And there he meets literally hundreds of different characters, hundreds of different ghosts, all from different time periods, all with different stories that they want to tell him. And the marvel of this is that each of those voices of those characters is so distinct and different, and sort of tied into the time period that they're from. And it's a pure example of a polyphonic novel, or a novel written by or told through many voices, but to the extreme. And not only do you have these hundreds of different narrators, some which are more important than others, you also have extracts from papers and from books, some of which are real and some of which George Saunders completely made up. So it's history, but it's history with a lot of fiction tied in as well. And this book made me cry. I mean, it did make me bawl my eyes out. There's a couple of bits in here where Abraham Lincoln sort of talks about his, or we're sort of shown the depth of grief for his son, that it was quite difficult for me to read. But it's so unusual. I've never read anything like it. As I say, you need to stick with it to begin with. But if you do, you know, it's a really, really rewarding book, and you don't need to know anything about American history to enjoy it. But if you do, that might enhance it even more. But George Saunders is an American writer, and one that I can't really recommend enough. So that are my 6 Booker Prize winner recommendations for you for Friday night. As I say, if this sort of video is the sort of thing you like, do give recommendations or suggestions for the kinds of reviews that you would like and you would find useful. If you're new to the channel, my name's Jenny, and I set myself a challenge this year to read 100 books. I'm smashing that, even with the book that I read that kind of killed my passion for reading this month. I've read about 60 odd books already, so I'm absolutely smashing it. But if you like book reviews, if you want to come along on the journey, do please like the video, do please subscribe, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week when I will give you my April roundup and my book of the month. So have a great long weekend and see you soon. Bye.